The Great Wheel by Robert Lawson. Chapter 5. Dinner the next night was a dreary affair. Uncle Michael, Aunt Cecilia, and the girls spoke in toneless voices. Agnes's eyes were suspiciously pink. Uncle Patrick, though, was in good humor. "Your crooked little man is a jewel, Con," he cried. "Knows his work up and down, and has the confidence of an elephant, which is what he'll have the need of on this job." "Give me something to hang it on," the wee fellow said, "and I'll rig you a tackle would lift the earth off its axis." He'll be bringing 3 of his men as well. So it's a grand find I've made, and all due to you, my lad. We're grateful to you, Mr. Ferris and I are. Con was wearing his heavy Galway clothes. His carpet bag held some well-worn work shirts, sweaters, and overalls. All his fashionable New York clothes were packed in a trunk, which Aunt Cecilia promised to look after. He had spent the day at the office going over things with a disconsolate Uncle Michael. "Young Tommy Glynn can take my place fine, Uncle Michael," he had said. "He knows the work as well as I do, and he's a harder driver. He'll get more done for you." "We'll make out, I suppose," Uncle Michael answered with a sigh. "But he's not of our blood, and an Ulsterman to boot. I had hoped for one of our own at my shoulder. But if it's not to be, it's not to be. Only I wish to God Honora had broke her blasted teacup before she went reading your fate in the leaves." Now, over the dessert, Uncle Michael turned to his brother. "Patrick," he asked, "just what is this great project, this wheel you speak of? I understand none of it at all." Uncle Patrick smiled. "I can tell you no more of it for the now," he said. "I shouldn't have mentioned it at all, only that Honora's prophecy shocked it out of me. Once Mr. Ferris has announced it official, it will fill all the newspapers, and you can read about it and talk about it to your heart's content. Talk about it you surely will, along with all the rest of the world, and I'll warrant your talk will be loud with pride that your crazy brother Pat and your young nephew are in the heart of the building of it." "Will there be danger in it, Patrick?" Aunt Cecilia asked anxiously. He avoided a direct reply. "There's a bit of danger in all real work," he admitted. "Con could easily have a sewer ditch cave in on him, or a paving slab slip and break his 2 legs, which would have been a mean and unglorious fate for a Kilroy. I'll be keeping an eye on him out there, never fear." The whole family accompanied them to Grand Central Station for the midnight train. Con's heart gave a great throb of excitement as they stepped into the cavernous, echoing train shed. From high up among the girders, flickering arc lights shed a violet semblance of moonlight. Hissing, panting locomotives coughed towering columns of smoke and steam. A train newly arrived from the west was caked with snow and ice. Con tightened the muffler that Agnes had knit for him snugly around his throat. It was bitterly cold. Halfway down the platform, they came on Martin Brennan and his crew seated patiently on their bundles. 2 of them were huge, square-headed, blonde Norwegians, so alike that they might have been twins. The third was a thin-nosed Cockney, missing several teeth and musically inclined. At the moment, he was singing A Bicycle Built for Two, very badly. Martin Brennan rose as they approached and greeted Uncle Patrick with a grin. "All present and accounted for, Mr. Giblin," he announced. "Scrimer here had a trifle overcome with emotion, and Porter, but put your mind at rest. He never indulges on the job." "See to that," Uncle Patrick said. "Once we reach Chicago, he'll drink nothing but the salubrious waters of Lake Michigan. Now get them aboard." The 2 stolid Norwegians gathered up their bundles, and Mr. Scrimer, who was now embarked on Rule Britannia, and mounted the steps of the smoker. There were affectionate farewells all around, and tearful ones on the part of Aunt Cecilia and the girls. "Patrick," said Uncle Michael ferociously, "mind Mary Kate's lad well. Does anything befall him, I'll have that beard of yours to stuff a horse collar, and your thick hide for a pair of traces." Suddenly they were in the dimly lit car, settling themselves on the hard seats, and the train was moving. Con hastily wiped a clear spot on the steamy window, caught one glimpse of 3 waving handkerchiefs, and then they were gone. He and Martin Brennan sat facing Uncle Patrick, whose huge bulk filled a whole seat. Behind them, the 2 Norwegians sat in unblinking silence. Skrymer, his head cushioned on their bundles, snored peacefully. Overhead, smoky kerosene lamps shed an uncertain light. At either end of the car, the small coal stoves glowed red. The air grew steamy, heavy with tobacco smoke. The wheels clicked steadily, the couplings rattled and clanged. "Uncle Patrick," Con asked, "couldn't you be telling us a bit more about Mr. Ferris's great wheel, now that we're working for him and all?" His uncle smiled as he lit his pipe. "I could indeed, and here's the way of it. You've doubtless been reading in the newspapers of the colossal World's Columbian Exposition to open in Chicago in the spring, May 1st, 1893. The greatest World's Fair ever was thought of. Well, the directors and committees, and the architects and millionaires that are running the affair, decided they wanted some huge and wonderful attraction, would put the Frenchmen and their Eiffel Tower to shame. So they came to the boss naturally, and they said, 'Mr. Ferris, for our fair, we want to build a stupendous, spectacular feature, totally different from anything was ever done before, only bigger. Can you suggest something?' 'I could,' says the boss, and he goes down to West Virginia and builds a couple of bridges while he's thinking it over. Then he comes back to Chicago and has lunch with the director and the committee and the engineers and the architects and all. 'Well, Mr. Ferris,' asked the director, 'have you an idea?' 'I have,' says the boss. 'Wait till I finish my chops and I'll tell it to you.' So he finished his chops, hauled out a pencil and a bit of paper, and sketched out a picture of his colossus of a wheel. 'It will be a tension wheel, 250 feet high. That's 7 times bigger than any wheel that was ever known. Taller than any building in Chicago. Was it set in Broadway in New York, a man on top of it could reach out his foot and give a kick to the weather vane atop the spire of Trinity Church. The axle will be set on towers 143 feet high,' the boss goes on, pointing it out with his fork. 'Around the rim of the wheel will be hung 36 cars, each one as big as a streetcar, and holding 36 passengers. Those passengers will have a ride they'll remember all the days of their lives. The way they'll be boasting on it to their children and their grandchildren.' 'They will not,' said the director, 'because the thing will never be built.' 'It's impossible,' the engineers said. 'Preposterous,' shout the architects. 'Absurd,' yelled the committee. Nobody had put up any money for such a harebrained contraption. 'Very good, gentlemen,' says the boss, helping himself to a toothpick. 'I've got other fish to fry. Thanks for the lunch.' And he gets his hat and goes home. Well, they argued and bellowed and shilly-shallied while the time slipped by. They consulted all the biggest engineers in the country, and they all said it couldn't be done. In the meantime, Mr. Ferris sat in his office and drew up all his plans down to the last bolt, nut, and rivet. Then he tucked them under his arm and went to see the director and the committee. 'Well, gentlemen,' he said, 'it's now November, and your fair opens May 1st. What do you say?' 'We've consulted the best engineering brains in the country, and they all said it can't be done,' said the director. 'The best engineering brains in the country are right here,' the boss said, tapping his forehead. 'And they say it can.' Well, they couldn't deny that, and they'd raised some of the money, so they gave him a concession. He ordered his steel from 6 of the best steel mills in the country, and they, knowing him well, went at making it hammer and tongs. Then, when everything was going smooth, the committee ran out of money, and they got timorous again, and took back their concession. But the boss just went ahead and ordered his stone and sand and cement, and begun digging the foundations for his towers. Then he put on his hat and goes to see the committee again. 'Gentlemen,' he said, 'it's now December, and your fair opens May 1st. Do you want your wheel or don't you?' We do, they said, but we've got no more money. Well, raise it, he said, or your wheel won't be finished till after the ball is over. And give me back my concession by the 15th, or I'll go about me business. So that's the state things we're in when I left last week, concluded Uncle Patrick. We may get there tomorrow, and we'll find we've got no jobs, but I don't think so. When the boss sets his hand to a thing, he gets it done. Somehow. Uncle Patrick, Con asked, you were after saying that Mr. Ferris's wheel is a tension wheel. What is it you'd call a tension wheel? Uncle Patrick scratched his ear with his pipe. The best I can explain it is this, he said. You've seen plenty of bicycle wheels, and doubtless have been wondering how a wheel like that, with wee thin spokes of wire, little thicker than a lady's hat pin, could be holding up the weight of a big full-grown man. Well, it's because, in a bicycle wheel, the weight is hung on all those little spokes. Any one of them would hold the weight of a man or two, men even. Any one of them would hold the weight of a man, or 2 men even, was it hung on them, although they wouldn't support the weight of a pound of tobacco if it stood on end. A bicycle wheel is a tension wheel. With all those wire spokes stretched tight as the wires in a piano, it'll be as strong as a clumsy wagon wheel. But that light, you can lift it with your little finger. Supple, too, put in Martin Brennan, like I was saying about the Brooklyn Bridge. Supple, too, agreed Uncle Patrick, and no more resistance to the wind than a canary cage, which is of great importance to Mr. Ferris's wheel, the way them gales from Lake Michigan would strip the fur off a buffalo. Uncle Patrick snuggled his chin into his beard and dozed off. From the seat behind, Mr. Schreimer's snores rose steadily. Con wiped a clear spot on the steamy window and looked out. They had left Albany behind and were now winding westward toward the Mohawk Valley. The moon was bright. Wood lots were etched sharply against the rolling, snow-covered hills. Along the eaves of dark barns, rows of icicles glittered. It looked cold. Con slept and dreamed of a peat cart with bicycle wheels 10 feet high. Old Gallagher was hitched between the shafts instead of the donkey, and Martin Brennan was driving. The cart was loaded with Wisconsin cheeses,